Hello class. I'm going to teach you now how to factor trinomials in the form ax squared plus bx plus c where a does not equal 1. I'm trying to make this video a little bit differently than last one because I'm trying to zoom in a little bit more. Let me know if this is better or maybe you don't like it as much as the last ones. I could have you view the whole page, but I'm wondering if you're watching it on a phone, if it's harder to see what I'm writing. And also let me know if you want me to try zooming in the lesson even more than what I'm doing right now. Okay, so let's start. In the last lesson, we easily factored expressions in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c by making that factored sum chart. We were also able to factor expressions. Sorry, let me go back here. I should specify that in the last lesson, when we did the factor sum chart, a was equal to 1. Now, we were also able to factor expressions in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c quickly when a was a common factor, so a was a number other than 1. In this lesson, we will not be able to factor out the a. In these types of questions, we're going to use a method called decomposition to factor the trinomial. Decomposition is not the only method that can be used for factoring this lesson's questions. If you learned another method last year, maybe it's a method that you prefer, you may use that method. Decomposition involves breaking up a term or expression into the parts that make it up. So these are the steps we're going to go through. We're going to find two numbers that multiply to the product of a times c. So what I mean is we're going to take the number in front of the x squared and the constant term and multiply it together, and we're looking for two numbers that multiply to that product. And at the same time, those two numbers must add up to b. Then we're going to rewrite the expression by breaking the bx term into two separate terms using the two numbers that we found in our chart. Let me just write down over here, I'm going to add that. You're going to make a chart to do that. And then we common factor twice. And then step 4 is to factor again. And the final answer should be a binomial times a binomial. That's the way it should look. So let's start. So in this, the 3 is the a, 14 is b, and the c term is the 8. So we're looking for factors of 24. I got the 24 from multiplying 8 times 3 together. So the 3 times 8 gives me the 24, and that, remember, is the a times c. Those two numbers need to multiply, they need to add up to give us b, which is 14. So it needs to sum to 14. So I start brainstorming. What numbers multiply to 24? 6 times 4 is 24. However, when I add 6 and 4 together, I only get 10. So I keep going. 8 times 3 is 24, but 8 plus 3 is 9. That doesn't work. How about 12 times 2? 12 plus 2 is 14. That's what I want. Okay, so that was step 1. Step 1 is to make your chart. Our next step, we're on step 2, is we're going to rewrite this original expression, the 3x squared plus 14x plus 8. However, we're not going to write 14x. Instead, we're going to write down the 12x plus 2x because that's the same as 14x. I'll write that down for you. So the 12x plus the 2x adds up to 14x, so it is replacing the 14x. And then my last term in this expression was plus 8. Okay, so that is step 2. We're on step 3. We're going to common factor twice. So when I look at 3x squared plus 12x, my greatest common factor is 3x. You're always going to have an x here, okay? Always, always, always. Well, unless the variable is different, like a b or an a or something. So there will always be a variable in this spot. And then when I factor out a 3x from the 3x squared plus 12 from these first two terms, I'm left with x plus 4. Okay, double check. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 4 is 12x. Okay, so that's common factoring once. It says to common factor twice. So we do it again. So this time I'm looking at these two terms, and look at the sign as well, and I'm going to factor out a 2 because it's the greatest common factor. And what I'm left with after I factor out a 2, so remember we're dividing each by 2, and I have x plus 4. Now it is not a coincidence that we get the same two terms, or sorry, the same two factors, x plus 4. This is always going to happen if you can find the combination of numbers that work in your table. Okay, if you're not getting this exact same parts here, you're doing something wrong. Okay, so that was step 3. Step 4 is the last step. We factor again, or common factor again. So here's one term and here's another term. What's common in those two terms? The x plus 4 is common. So I'm going to factor it out. And what's left when I remove the x plus 4? I have a 3x left. And when I remove the x plus 4, I have a positive 2. It's now factored. Let's try it again. Okay, so now we're going to factor 2x squared minus x minus 28. A is 2. B, think about what B is here. B is negative 1. And C is the negative 28. So I'm going to make my chart. In my chart, I'm looking for factors of 2 times negative 28. 2 times 28 is negative 56. Okay, so again, I get that number by multiplying 2 times the negative 28, because that's A times C. And that needs to add up to B. So B is not negative x. It's the coefficient of the x term, which is negative 1. So what multiplies to, let's work with positive 56. Well, 7 times 8 is positive 56. However, I want it to equal negative 56, so I need to put a negative somewhere. So let's see if we've done that right. Negative 7 plus 8 is positive 1. So I got to change something. It needs to be negative 1. I can change the sign. So 7 plus negative 8 is equal to negative 1. That's what we want. So again, that was step 1. So step 2, we're going to rewrite that expression. We're going to rewrite the negative 1x. That's negative 1x, remember, as positive 7x minus 8x. You could also do this in the reverse order. That would be fine. If you put it down in the reverse order, your work will look slightly different than mine. However, it will work out at the end. You'll get the same answer. Your two factors just might be in reverse order. Okay, so that's step 2. Step 3, we common factor twice. So 2x squared plus 7x needs to be common factored. What's common is an x. When I divide each of these terms by x, I'm left with a 2x plus 7. When I common factor with my next two terms, the negative 8x minus 28, I'm going to pull out a negative 4. That's my greatest common factor. Remember, we've got to pull out the greatest common factor. And also remember, when my leading coefficient, because I'm just factoring this part here, is a negative, I'm factoring out the negative value. So what's left is 2x. And when I also divide this by the negative 4, I have positive 7. Okay, it needs to look exactly the same. Double check. If it doesn't, you're doing something wrong. So again, that was step 3. Step 4 is we factor again. So this is a term and this is a term. What's common? It's the 2x plus 7. So I'm going to factor it out. When I remove that 2x plus 7, I'm left with an x. And when I remove it over here, I'm left with a negative 4. It is now factored. It's written as a product. Okay, let's do one more question together. Remember, at any time if you want to try this yourself, just pause the video and work through it, and then you can resume the video. So we're looking for factors of a times c. So a times c this time is negative 42 because that's 6 times negative 7. And those factors need to add up to 11 in this question. So again, it's sometimes difficult to come up with numbers that multiply to a negative number, so ignore the sign. The other thing is, if you do not know your times tables really well, this is more difficult. So you might want to use a multiplication table. You can do a bit of trial and error on a calculator. If you are committed to memorizing your times tables, that would be really, really helpful for this unit to practice them. If you go to the discussion section in the D2L under useful websites, I've posted some websites that will help you learn your times tables. So again, if you do not know your times tables, this is not easy coming up with the numbers that work. Okay, so let's say, well, I know that 7 times 6 is 42. However, it needs to be negative 42, so I'm going to put a negative. I'll try it beside the 7 and see what happens. Negative 7 plus 6 is negative 1. That's not what I want. So I need to try different numbers. I need a bigger spread between those numbers. So I'm going to try negative 14 times 3. Now, negative 14 plus 3 is negative 11. Okay, so it's almost right. My signs are wrong, so I'm going to switch the signs. So I've got 14 times negative 3 instead. And when I add those together, I get the combination that I'm looking for. So this is what I want. That's step 1 again. Okay, step 2. I'm going to take the 14 and the negative 3, and I'm going to use it to rewrite this term, the 11n. So 11n is the same as saying positive 14n minus 3n. 14n minus 3n is 11n, so it has the same value. That's step 2. I now common factor twice. So I'm looking at these two terms. 2n is the common factor. When I factor out the 2n, I'm left with 3n plus 7. Okay, so make sure you're doing the math yourself. Pause the video, make sure it makes sense. And then I'm factoring again. So this time the only thing that I can factor out is a negative. Now what I'd like you to do is actually write down negative 1 because it's easier to actually write down the 1 instead of just a negative. It's just easier to see the next step. When I factor out the negative or the negative 1, I'm left with 3n plus 7. I double check, it's exactly the same. Means I'm doing it right. That was step 3. And step 4, I'm going to factor again. So what's common in my two terms is the 3n plus 7. When I factor it out, let me explain that to you a little bit differently. If I was to divide both sides by the 3n plus 7 to figure out what goes in the brackets, that cancels and that cancels. And I'm left with a 2n minus 1. Okay, I'd like you to do the guided practice. So try it on your own, on the back. So you're going to pause the video when you're going to try it, and then resume the video when you are ready. So let's take up the answers to the guided practice now. So I'm going to make my chart. I'll do my chart below here. So in my chart, we're looking for factors of negative 70. And you should have had that those factors need to add up to 3. You may have tried negative 10 and 7. However, be careful when you're doing this because that ends up being negative 3. So I want to switch the signs. 10 minus 7 is positive 3. That's what we want. So that was step 1. So step 2. We're going to rewrite that b term. So I have 35 b squared. Sorry, when I say the b term, I really mean the b, what's normally in that bx position. So we have 35b squared plus 10b minus 7b minus 2. There's our step 2. I'm on my common factoring twice step. So from those two terms, the greatest common factor is 5b, which leaves us with a 7b plus 2 after we factor it out. Then I'm going to factor out a negative 1 to have the same 7b plus 2. That's step 3. And then we factor again. When we factor again, we have 7b plus 2 times 5b minus 1. Because that's what's left. When we factor this out, we have 5b, and I take that out, I have a negative 1. Now, you may have gotten this answer, but your work in these two steps might look a little bit different. And that could be because you wrote down the negative 7b first, and then the positive 10b. So if you went through the steps and then got the same right answer, maybe these are in a different position, you're doing it correctly. One method isn't better than the other. It doesn't matter. So this line would also look different if you put these in a different order, and that's all fine. Okay, let's take up the last question. So in this question here for our chart, we're looking for factors of 6, because that's a times c. 3 times 2 is 6. That sums to negative 5. So 3 times 2 is 6, but when I add them together, I get positive 5. So then I got to change my signs. Negative 3 times negative 2 is also positive 6, and negative 3 plus negative 2 gives me that negative 5. So we're going to use these two numbers to replace the bx term. So I have 3x squared. I'm going to rewrite that. Now I'm replacing the negative 5x with negative 3x minus 2x. Again, it could be in the reverse order. The only thing that's going to happen is your step's going to look a little bit different than mine, but that's fine. We common factor twice. So the greatest common factor with my first two terms is 3x. When I factor that out, I'm left with an x minus 1. My greatest common factor with my next two terms is negative 2. So remember, when this leading coefficient is a negative, because I'm factoring this part, I have to factor out the negative, not the positive. If you factor out a positive 2, your signs aren't going to be exactly the same as the signs in this bracket. Sorry, I'm going to change the colors here. So when I factor out the negative 2, that leaves me with an x and a negative 1. Again, be careful with your signs. Okay, and the last step is we factor again. So what's common in my two terms is the x minus 1. And when I factor that out, what's left is the 3x minus 2. That's it. Make sure you are posting any questions to the homework help forum under the discussions, because other people may have had the same questions as you. You are welcome to take a picture of your work and ask, what did I do wrong? And then either somebody else can respond how to do it properly, or I will. And that's a way to for me to assess you in your participation in this class. Have a good day, everyone.